I sat across from a long glass table, portfolio in hand, wearing the only blazer that made me feel like I belonged in rooms like this. Final interview, final negotiation. I had spent 3 weeks jumping through hoops for Greenward Technologies. Technical screenings, project presentations, meetings with every department head. They said they were impressed. They said I was exactly what they were looking for. But when the offer came in, it didn't match the weight of those words. The number slid across the table felt like a slap disguised as a handshake. I didn't react right away. I took a breath, measured my tone, and said clearly, I appreciate the opportunity, but this compensation doesn't reflect the market rate for a senior-level specialist with 8 years of experience in rare earth material recycling. The hiring manager leaned back in his chair and chuckled. Not a nervous chuckle, not a polite chuckle, a full-bodied, glass wall-rattling laugh, like I had just told a joke. His colleagues smirked beside him, shifting in their chairs as if they'd seen this moment before. He looked at my resume, tapped it once with his pen, and said, You know, we have at least 20 eager candidates who'd take this offer without a second thought. Maybe you've overestimated your importance here. For a second, the room went quiet in my mind. That kind of quiet when every emotion is suspended between shock and rage. My fingers tightened around my portfolio. I could feel the blood rush to my face, but I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. I stood up slowly, adjusted the cuff of my sleeve, looked him straight in the eye and said, No, I haven't, but you've definitely underestimated it. I walked out. I heard them laughing again behind me as the door clicked shut. That sound followed me down the hallway, into the elevator, and out into the parking lot. It played over and over in my head as I sat in my car, hands frozen on the steering wheel. That moment could have broken me. Honestly, it almost did. I had just walked away from the only concrete job offer I had, in an industry where sustainability budgets were being cut, where competition was fierce, and where even highly qualified candidates were scrambling for positions. My rent was due in 2 weeks. My savings were disappearing faster than I wanted to admit. Every rational voice in my life would have told me I made a mistake. But as I sat in that driver's seat, still hearing the echo of their laughter, something shifted. It wasn't just the insult. It wasn't just the disrespect. It was how quickly they assumed I wouldn't push back, how certain they were that someone like me would fold, would take what was offered, and be grateful. That assumption lit a fire I hadn't felt in years, because I knew what I brought to the table. I knew what my process could do, how it had already transformed extraction efficiency in pilot programs. I knew the value of my time, my research, and my mind, and I was done letting people pretend otherwise. That day, something in me hardened, but not in a bitter way. It wasn't anger that stayed with me. It was clarity. They laughed, and I walked out feeling humiliated. But beneath that humiliation, something else sparked, something I would carry into every decision after. I didn't know it yet, but that laugh was the beginning of everything. 3 years of my life were poured into that research. Long nights in a basement lab with unreliable equipment, weekends lost to data validation, entire holidays sacrificed for one more trial, one more variable, one more result that might get us closer. I wasn't chasing applause. I was chasing a solution. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday. I remember it clearly because I had just missed my cousin's wedding to run one last batch. But when the numbers came in, I knew we had something no one else had touched. A chemical bonding theory that changed the cost curve for rare earth material extraction. Cleaner, faster, significantly more efficient. It had the potential to change everything, but no one heard my name when it hit the industry. They heard hers. My former supervisor, Meredith, presented the findings at the Earth Resources Conference. She walked across the stage in a fitted gray suit, gesturing to slides built from my notes, graphs taken directly from my simulations, and a methodology she barely understood. I watched from the third row, surrounded by hundreds of professionals in the field. I saw them nod, take notes, snap photos of the screen. I heard the crowd react when she announced the efficiency gain: 42% cost reduction, higher yield purity. Everything I had worked for, boiled down into bullet points on her slide deck. My name wasn't on a single one. There was a footnote, buried in the third slide. Assistance provided by the research team. That was me. That was 3 years of obsession and discipline, reduced to a line no one read aloud. And Meredith, she smiled and accepted the applause like she had earned it. She took questions with ease, spun answers crafted from my work, nodded as people congratulated her on the innovation. I sat there, still, not angry, not yet, just hollow. It wasn't the first time I'd been overlooked. It wasn't even the worst. But something about that moment, sitting in the shadows while someone else basked in recognition I had earned, made something in me go quiet, too quiet. That night, in a beige hotel room with buzzing overhead lights and a thin window view of a parking lot, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my laptop. I scrolled through the draft reports I had written. I pulled up the testing logs, the process charts, the theoretical model I had built from scratch, and I said it out loud, to no one. Never again. Never again will I let my voice be erased. Never again will I let someone else rewrite my story while I sit in the audience and clap politely. Never again will I be silent about my worth. It wasn't about vengeance. It wasn't even about getting credit. Not really. It was about presence, about being seen, about standing in my own work and refusing to shrink. For a long time, I believed excellence would speak for itself, that if I kept my head down, stayed late, delivered more than expected, someone would notice. But excellence whispered, ego shouted. And people like Meredith knew how to fill the silence. From that night forward, I made myself a quiet promise. If no one was going to advocate for my value, I would. Even if my voice shook, even if it made people uncomfortable, even if it meant walking away from everything I had worked for, that promise would change everything. The elevator ride down from that final meeting at Greenwood was only 30 seconds long, but it felt like I aged a year. By the time I stepped onto the sidewalk, the adrenaline had faded, and the silence that followed felt heavier than I expected. I had just turned down the only job offer on the table, not just turned it down, walked out on it, calmly but firmly. While the room laughed behind me, the first thing I did was sit in my car for 20 minutes, staring at the dashboard, gripping the steering wheel like it could somehow anchor me. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat in the stillness, letting the weight of my decision settle in. Back at home, my apartment felt colder than usual. Maybe it was the draft, or maybe it was the growing awareness that rent was due in less than 2 weeks and my savings account wouldn't carry me far. I heated up leftovers, ate them standing over the sink, and ignored the 3 unread texts from my sister. Lucia finally called. She didn't waste time. "You did what?" "They lowballed me." I said. The salary was junior level for senior level expertise. I wasn't going to start a new job already undervalued. In this economy? Are you crazy? I could hear the fear in her voice. Not judgment, fear. She knew I wasn't reckless. She knew I wasn't impulsive. But she also knew how unstable the job market had become, especially in our industry. "I'll figure it out," I told her. "I have to after we hung up." I opened my laptop. I revised my resume until 2 in the morning. I sent out 14 applications that night alone. I scheduled 2 interviews before the sun came up. I updated my professional profiles, added links to published research, polished every line of my portfolio. I also made a spreadsheet. I calculated exactly how long my savings would last if I cut every non-essential expense: streaming services, takeout, gym membership, even the good coffee beans I used to justify as a minor luxury. 53 days, less than 2 months, not ideal. But not impossible. The next morning I ran. I'm not a runner by nature, but I laced up anyway. The air was sharp, my chest tight. I ran hard, not to stay fit, but to chase away the fear that kept trying to sneak in. The questions that came in the quiet. Had I been arrogant? Was my work really worth what I thought? Maybe they were right to laugh. No, I refused to let those doubts take root. I didn't walk out of that office because I thought I was better than anyone. I walked out because I finally believed I was equal. That's a different kind of risk. Every day that followed was a balancing act between resolve and fear. I kept applying. I researched companies thoroughly. I practiced my negotiation points out loud. I reminded myself of the value I brought, even if no one else said it aloud. The silence was loud. The uncertainty was real. But so was the dignity I had chosen to protect. People always say knowing your worth is empowering. What they don't talk about is how lonely it feels in the middle. Between the decision to stand tall and the moment someone finally sees what you saw all along, I was still in the middle, but I wasn't going to lower my head just to feel safe. 3 days after that interview, just as I was about to log into a virtual screening with a startup in Denver, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. But something in me said answer. "This is Nina." I said, "Ms. Caldwell." A voice replied. "This is Darren Winslow, CEO of Greenword Technologies." I froze. We hadn't spoken before. He hadn't been part of any interview. I had barely seen his name mentioned during the process. Now he was calling me directly. Calm, measured, but curious. "I understand you turned down our offer," he said. "That's correct. That's unusual." He added, "After you left, our engineering team reviewed your portfolio again, specifically your method for lithium separation. They believe it could fundamentally transform our production model. The projected savings are considerable, far more than we initially estimated." I sat down trying to absorb the sudden pivot in tone, in stakes. "Are you open to continuing this conversation?" he asked. I let the pause stretch long enough to remind both of us who held the leverage now. "I'm open," I said, "but I'll be honest. It would take more than just adjusting a number. What would it take?" It wasn't the first time I'd thought about this question, not about Greenword specifically, but in general. What would it actually take for me to feel valued, protected, respected? 3 things. I said, first, I want a compensation package that reflects market standards for someone with my specialization. That means base salary plus 15% to acknowledge the initial oversight. There was a pause. Then he said, "That seems fair." Second, I want to lead the materials division. Full autonomy. I decide the research direction. I staff my own team. I sign off on implementation timelines. Understood. What's the third? This one mattered most. I want transparent compensation bands implemented across the organization. No more guesswork. No more hidden pay gaps. Everyone knows the range for their role. No disparities based on gender, race, or negotiation tactics. Another pause. Longer this time. "That's unconventional," he said. So was laughing in the face of a qualified candidate. Yet, here we are. I'm asking because I've lived it. I've been on the wrong end of those disparities for years. If I'm going to build something meaningful inside this company, I can't be part of maintaining a broken system. He cleared his throat. "Let me speak to the board. Can I call you tomorrow?" "You can." 10 minutes later, I got an email from Nolan, the same hiring manager who had smirked at my salary expectations. Suddenly, his tone had changed. He wrote that the project's timeline now depended on my extraction method, and he hoped we could revisit terms. I didn't reply. That evening, my phone rang again. "Darren Winslow, we'd like to move forward," he said. "The board agrees to your terms. with one adjustment. We'd like to phase in compensation transparency over 6 months to allow time to review existing contracts. That's acceptable. I said, but I want to be part of that review. Of course. And just like that, the conversation was no longer about whether I was worth the role. It was about the future of the company and how I would shape it. I didn't beg to come back. I didn't lower my ask. I walked away from that first meeting holding only my dignity. And now, I was returning with the power to change everything. On my first day at Greenwood, the office looked almost exactly as I remembered it. Sleek, quiet, efficient. But it felt different. This time, I wasn't here to impress anyone. I wasn't trying to fit in. I was here to lead. The view from my new office stretched out over the city skyline. On the desk, a welcome packet, a signed contract, and a note from Darren. Let's build something better. By noon, I had already requested access to compensation data across my division. HR hesitated. They said it would take time. I reminded them this had already been agreed upon at the executive level. The file arrived in my inbox before the end of the day. I stayed late reviewing it, line by line. I compared salaries, qualifications, years of service, performance reviews. What I found wasn't surprising, but it was sobering. Women in identical roles were making, on average, 22% less than their male peers. Employees with Hispanic surnames, like mine, earned 18% less than white colleagues with the same job titles and credentials. Some of the most experienced, most loyal team members had been underpaid for years, simply because they never asked for more. It wasn't malicious, it was systemic. A quiet, gradual erosion of value that no one had challenged out loud. Until now, at the end of the week, I scheduled a division-wide meeting. 57 employees gathered in the conference room, including Nolan, whose tight smile and stiff posture told me exactly how comfortable he felt reporting to me now. I started with the usual: appreciation for the welcome, excitement about the projects ahead. Then I clicked to my first slide, a chart, no names, just roles, salaries, years of experience. The disparities were impossible to ignore. This, I said, is our current compensation structure. As you can see, there are significant inconsistencies that don't align with performance, skill set, or tenure. The room went quiet. Some people leaned forward, others crossed their arms. A few glanced at Nolan. I let the silence sit just long enough for the weight of the numbers to settle. Over the next 6 months, I continued, we'll be implementing transparent salary bands. Every role will have a defined range based on market data and internal equity. Raises will be tied to skill development and contributions, not negotiation tactics or personal relationships. I paused, then added, I know this might make some people uncomfortable, but discomfort isn't the enemy. Silence is. I didn't call anyone out. I didn't have to. The data spoke louder than any accusation. After the meeting, a few employees lingered. A research analyst named Paloma approached me, tablet clutched to her chest. Is that really happening here? She asked quietly. Yes, I said, and we're going to fix it. She nodded, eyes bright but cautious. I've been here 3 years. Last month, I found out my new colleague, a man with half my experience, makes $15,000 more than me. When I brought it up to Nolan, he told me talking about salaries was unprofessional. Not anymore. I said, the following Monday. I could feel the shift in the air. People were talking, some hopeful, some skeptical. A few visibly uneasy, especially those who had benefited from the old system. But change was no longer a concept here. It had a face, a name, and this time it wasn't invisible. The resistance didn't start loudly. It never does. It began with small things, a calendar invite that disappeared, an equipment request that got lost in processing, an email thread where I was somehow left out of key decisions. At first, I gave it the benefit of the doubt. Mistakes happen, systems lag. But then it kept happening, and it always seemed to happen to my team. I didn't react. I documented every missed invite, every delay, every access restriction. I kept a record, dates, times, screenshots. I created a shared drive offsite where everything was mirrored. If someone tried to erase our work, they wouldn't succeed. Paloma became my first true ally. She had already experienced the system's quiet cruelty. She knew how to read between the lines. Then came Henri, a brilliant chemical engineer who had been passed over for promotions 3 years in a row, despite multiple company-wide innovations. And Daisy, a technician whose protocols were used daily without credit. They weren't just competent, they were sharp, steady, and tired of being invisible. Together, we worked after hours. We converted a storage closet into an auxiliary lab. When equipment got held up, we used older models, tested everything twice, and logged every result like it might one day be questioned. The breakthrough came faster than expected. Our process reduced waste by 44% and boosted rare earth yield by 37%. The numbers weren't just promising, they were undeniable. So we scheduled the executive review the night before the meeting. I made sure the final report was triple-checked. Graphs, simulations, projections. The cost-benefit analysis showed a full return on investment in under 9 months. A $12 million annual savings after full rollout. It was everything they said they wanted. And that's when Nolan made his move. I arrived late to the department meeting due to a supplier call I had confirmed weeks ago. When I stepped into the room, Nolan was already speaking. Given the concerns about resource allocation, he was saying, we'll be placing the implementation of Dr. Caldwell's process on temporary hold. The room was full. My team looked stunned. My name was on every timeline, every milestone. And yet, here he was, trying to pause the whole project behind my back. That's interesting, I said, loud enough for the room to shift. All eyes turned to me, because the board approved expedited funding for implementation just yesterday, and our supplier contract was finalized this morning. He blinked. That contract hasn't been... I held up my tablet, signed by Darren Winslow at 10:14 a.m. Today. Delivery begins Monday. Silence. I looked at the room. Let's talk about the actual timeline we'll be following. For the next 30 minutes, I laid it all out. Phased integration, minimal disruption, clear deliverables, roles assigned, expectations set. Nolan said nothing. He smiled tightly, but his knuckles were white around his tablet. As the room emptied, he caught my arm at the door. You've made a serious miscalculation, he said quietly. This company ran just fine before you got here. I removed his hand gently. Some people really are irreplaceable. I said, the key is knowing who they are. And then I walked away. Not with bravado, not with anger, but with something far more dangerous to people like him. Momentum. The invitation came on a Tuesday morning, an executive leadership meeting. No agenda listed, just a time, a room number, and a list of attendees. Darren, the HR director, Nolan, and me. I knew what it meant. By the time I walked into the conference room, Nolan was already seated, arms crossed, expression calm in the way people get when they believe they're about to win something they didn't earn. Darren greeted me with a polite nod. The head of HR looked uneasy. I sat down across from them and opened my tablet, already queued to the folder I had spent the last 6 weeks quietly building. Nolan spoke first. He said my approach had created confusion across departments, that I was encouraging staff to bypass established management structures. He said I had overstepped my role, implemented policies without consensus, and damaged internal morale. He ended with a phrase I knew he had rehearsed. She's building a parallel power structure. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't interrupt. I just waited for him to finish. Then I tapped the screen in front of me and shared it to the room's main display. "Let's take a look," I said. I clicked through the first set of documents. Emails where Nolan had instructed team members to reroute lab resources away from my division. Messages asking staff to delay equipment requests. Meeting invites that had been deleted from shared calendars. Each incident might have seemed like a one-off. Together, they formed a pattern. Then I pulled up the spreadsheet. Dates, actions, impact, every delay we had faced, paired with the name of the person responsible and their chain of command. Finally, I showed video clips from internal presentations, moments where Nolan presented ideas developed by my team as his own. I paused one clip on a slide that Henri had designed, still bearing his original file name in the corner. "And this," I said, "is the most concerning." An email chain between Nolan and a supplier, directing them to withhold shipment confirmation despite knowing the CEO had already approved the contract. Darren leaned forward. His tone shifted. "How did you get that?" One of the recipients felt uncomfortable and forwarded it to me. I said, "Several others have done the same." Nolan's face turned red. "This is being twisted," he said. "Out of context. She's manipulating basic operations to create a story that doesn't exist. She's undermining. She's saved us millions." Darren interrupted. "What exactly have you done?" Silence. The HR director looked up from her notes. "This aligns with several complaints we've received recently, all pointing to targeted interference." Darren looked directly at Nolan. "We'll be discussing your transition out of operational leadership. Effective immediately." The words hit like a stone dropped into still water. Quiet, but final. "You can leave the room now," Darren added. Nolan stood slowly, collecting his things without a word. He didn't look at me as he left. After the door closed, Darren turned back to me. "I'd like to offer you a promotion," he said. "Executive Vice President of Innovation and Operations. You'll oversee your current division." And his... I blinked. "That's a significant expansion of responsibility." He nodded. "And compensation will be adjusted accordingly." I sat still for a moment, absorbing what had just happened. "You've proven something most people never do," he continued. "That technical brilliance can coexist with principled leadership. That strategy can be quiet and still change everything." I gave a small nod. Then I said, "Let's get to work." 6 months later, I walked into the same conference room where they once laughed at me. The walls had been repainted, the chairs were new, brighter lights, updated monitors, a polished oak table in place of the cold glass one I remembered. But the real transformation wasn't physical. It was cultural, structural, visible in the way people looked at each other across departments, in the kind of questions they asked, in the trust that slowly began to replace fear. I took my seat at the head of the table. Productivity across operations had increased by over 20%. Turnover had dropped in half. And after months of careful planning, legal reviews, and team-wide sessions, we had completed the implementation of full compensation transparency. Every employee now knew exactly how their salary was determined. Clear ranges, clear advancement criteria, no guesswork, no games. People no longer had to wonder if their worth was being measured in silence. And they were thriving. I had just wrapped up the quarterly planning meeting when a young woman approached me. She was new. Akira Tanaka, environmental compliance specialist, still learning the building. Still clutching her tablet like a shield, she waited until most of the others had filed out, then stepped forward. "Dr. Caldwell," she said, almost in a whisper, "I just wanted to tell you, I joined this company because of you." I raised an eyebrow. "Me? I read about what you did here." The compensation changes, the lab reforms, the accountability. I've worked at places where none of that existed, places where people like me never moved forward. She glanced around, still cautious. "You actually fixed the system. That's why I wanted to be here. I smiled. Thank you. That means a lot. She nodded, gave a small wave, and slipped out of the room. I stayed behind for a moment longer, just taking it in. The quiet hum of progress. The steady rhythm of a workplace finally working. Then my phone buzzed. A news alert. My former employer, the one where Meredith took the stage with my discovery and left me in the audience, had just posted their third consecutive quarter of losses. Their failure to adapt to newer, more efficient extraction processes had cost them major contracts. Their stock had dropped 30%. I stared at the headline for a moment, then tapped the screen off. No bitterness, no gloating, just a quiet, full circle kind of satisfaction. Because the truth is, the best revenge isn't winning at someone else's expense. It's building something better, better systems, better teams, better futures for yourself and for everyone who comes after you. That's what legacy looks like. And this time, my name was exactly where it belonged.